Welcome to our deep dive, everybody. Today we're going deep into some fascinating stuff. We're going to be talking about behavioral economics, specifically from excerpts you all picked out of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's all about how our minds deal with risk, making choices, and especially, yeah, those money decisions.
It's going to be fun, yeah. This stuff is really key. For ages, economics assumed we were all like perfectly rational robots just maximizing our wealth. But that's not really how people work, is it?
Not at all. The book actually talks about that, right?
Yeah.
How for centuries, this thing called Bernoulli's expected utility theory was king. Basically, it said people choose whatever gives them the most wealth, on average.
Ah,
But,
But humans don't really work like that.
nope.
And that's where Kahneman and Tversky come in, right? With prospect theory. Huge shift. They saw that we don't react to like the total amount of money we have. It's more about the changes, gains or losses compared to where we're at right
So
now.
it's not the absolute number, but how much it went up or down from what we're used to.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Two people both got 5 million bucks, but one person gained 4 million to get there. The other lost 4 million. Are they going to feel the same?
I wouldn't think so. Like, gaining 4 million would be, what, ecstatic? But losing that much, even if you end up at 5 million, it'd still feel awful, I bet.
Totally. And this right here, how we feel gains and losses differently, that's at the heart of prospect theory. It's even got that famous visual, the S-shaped curve, figure 10 in the book, that shows how losses loom larger.
Ah, yes, the famous graph. Why is losing, say, 100 bucks so much more painful than gaining 100 is good? Are we just wired to be negative?
More than just being negative, this goes way back biologically. Like for our ancestors, think about it. Avoiding danger was way more important for survival than like chasing some reward. Imagine early humans, right? A predator shows up. You're not going to be focused on what you might gain hunting it.
You want to avoid being lunch.
Exactly. So over time, we got really tuned into potential losses. But here's the thing. The book also says this loss aversion, it's not the same for everyone, right?
Right. There were differences based on what people go through, their lives, the situations.
For sure. Like you take those high-stakes financial traders, they're dealing with gains and losses all day long. They actually have a lower loss aversion than most of us.
Let emotions rule every move, right?
So while loss aversion is like built into us, how much we react to it, that can change based on experience.
Absolutely.
So how does all this actually play out when we make decisions every day?
That's when we get to the fourfold pattern. It's in figure 13. Basically, this shows how much we're willing to risk changes, depending if it's a high or low chance of winning or losing. And this is where prospect theory gets really good at predicting how people act, even when it seems kind of irrational.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Break it down for us, these 4 scenarios, and how prospect theory says we'll act in each. All right, let's start with high chance of gain. Like, you're pretty sure you're going to win something. Most people there, they're risk averse. Take a smaller, guaranteed win over a bigger, but maybe you get it win, like classic economic theory would say.
Yeah, makes sense. I'd rather have 50 bucks for sure than a 50-50 chance at 100. But what if the odds of winning are really low? Like, do we stay risk averse? Or,
Not quite. Low chance of gain, we flip. Suddenly we're risk seekers. Think about lotteries, right? People
yeah.
spending money for a tiny chance at huge winnings, even though odds are they're going to lose.
So, big enough potential reward, even if it's a long shot, we'll gamble. Okay, what about when we're facing losing something? Do we get more careful then?
Now, this is interesting. High chance of loss, we actually get more risk seeking. It's like desperate gambles to avoid a sure loss, even if the gamble could make things worse.
Ah, so clinging to that hope of avoiding the loss entirely, even if it means, what, potentially losing even more. Emotions really driving that bus, huh?
Yep. And this is where prospect theory is so useful. It shows how emotions, our biases, they can make us choose things that objectively maybe aren't the best for us.
All right, so high chance of losing, we gamble. What about if it's a low chance of losing? Still risky.
Nope, back to risk averse. We'll pay extra, like with insurance, just to minimize even a small risk of a big loss. All about minimizing those threats.
That explains insurance. You're statistically likely to pay more in premiums than you'll ever get back if something bad happens. But it's that peace of mind, right?
Exactly. That emotional weight we put on the potential loss, it's huge. And this goes beyond money. Remember Professor R and his wine collection?
Wouldn't sell a bottle for less than 100 bucks, but wouldn't have bought it for more than 35 just because he owned it. It was worth more to him.
The endowment effect in action. Whatever we own, we overvalue it just because it's ours. And it's not just wanting profit. Kahneman talks about experiments. They gave people either a mug or a chocolate bar, same value.
Let me guess. They didn't want to trade, even if, like, they might have preferred the other thing.
You got it. Most people stuck with what they had. Objectively, no difference. But giving up their mug felt like a bigger loss than getting the chocolate was a gain.
Loss aversion again, but for stuff, not just cash. Are there times when this endowment thing doesn't happen?
There are, yeah. People who trade stuff all the time, like shopkeepers, they're less prone to it. They're used to buying and selling, so letting go of an item doesn't feel so personal.
What about people who are, struggling financially, always facing losses? Do they even have the endowment effect?
That's a good point. Context matters a lot for these biases. My guess is, in situations of scarcity, maybe the effect is weaker or it shows up differently. Like, basic needs got to come before emotional attachment to stuff.
Man, this is making me think. We can't just assume these biases are the same for everyone, right? Depends on their life, their situation. Already seeing loss aversion everywhere now.
It's definitely eye-opening. But the real power is using this knowledge in our own lives. How do we make better choices, especially with risk and uncertainty?
Great question. And that's a perfect lead-in to the next part of our deep dive. We're going to dig into how the way information is presented can change how risky something feels, even if the facts are the same.
Looking forward to it. Let's see what those excerpts you picked have to say about that.
So, loss aversion, big deal, but I'm thinking, how much does just the way information is presented affect us? Like framing, right? Can that change what we choose, even if the facts are the same?
Framing is huge, yeah. It really taps into that system one thinking, that fast gut reaction stuff. Remember, system one, not so good with numbers, but images, stories that it gets.
You mentioned that before, like saying a risk is 0.001% or saying 1 in 100,000 kids will. Same stats, but totally different feeling.
Exactly. That one kid facing whatever the risk is, that image sticks with us. The other 99,999 kind of fade away. This is why lawyers, activists, marketers, they're all about framing. Get us to overestimate or downplay risks, all based on how our minds work.
So we can be manipulated, even when we think we're being all logical. Does Kahneman give us any, defense moves against this framing stuff?
He does, yeah. He suggests we got to get system two involved. That's the slower, more analytical part of our thinking. So when facing a decision, hit pause. Look at it from different angles. Are there emotional hooks in there? Is the info presented in a way that's skewing how I see it?
So don't just go with a gut feeling, because that might be the framing working on us. Anything else to watch out for?
Well, Kahneman also talks about how we tend to overestimate rare events, especially if they're, really vivid, emotionally strong. Like, he talks about living in Israel during a time when there were a lot of terrorist attacks.
I can't imagine, even if statistically the risk was low, just living with that fear.
Yeah, and the book talks about this thing called the availability cascade, where if something is really publicized, like those attacks, it becomes front and center in our minds. Media coverage, conversations, it all makes it feel way more common than it really is.
The news loves those sensational stories, and they do stick with you. But how's this connected to decision-making?
So being more aware of these rare events, even if they're unlikely, it messes with our perception of risk. We might make choices based on fear, even if the actual odds say we shouldn't be so worried.
Like Kahneman himself, not parking near buses, even though he knew it was statistically safer than driving. We know better, but emotions take over.
That's it. And it's not just bad stuff, winning the lottery, right? Super unlikely, but that excitement, the possibility, it's powerful.
Hence why people keep buying those tickets. A tiny glimmer of hope, even if it's not rational. Why are we so drawn to those rare events? Any ideas from Kahneman?
He talks about the possibility effect, where unlikely outcomes, we give them way too much weight in our minds. It's like drawn to the potential, even if the chance is tiny. And then opposite of that, there's the certainty effect. We undervalue stuff that's almost guaranteed to happen.
So both ends of the spectrum, super unlikely and super likely we overemphasize, but the stuff in the middle, not so much.
That's the idea. And both of these go against what traditional economics would say. We should be weighing things based on their actual probability, right? But our minds don't always play by the rules of logic, according to Kahneman.
There's that system one messing with us again.
Yeah.
Any other examples in the book that show this happening?
There's this experiment. People had to estimate the chances of each team in a basketball tournament winning. When they did it one team at a time, their guesses added up to over 200%. Obviously can't have that.
So were they just bad at math?
Not really. When they guessed on if the winner would come from the Eastern or Western Conference, much more reasonable. So it seems like their brains, when looking at single teams, couldn't handle the probabilities right. But broader view, They did okay.
Focusing too much on each possibility, especially exciting ones, throws us off.
Yeah, Kahneman calls it focused attention. The event we're thinking about, if it's emotional, easy to imagine, it gets bigger in our minds than it really is.
Yeah.
And this doesn't just affect how we see probabilities, right? It also changes how much we're willing to bet on those long shot outcomes. Like in that basketball thing, people were betting way more on individual teams than they should have based on the odds, even though betting on all 8 teams would have guaranteed they lost money overall.
The excitement of picking the right team, even if it's a bad bet overall, man, I see how this all ties into money decisions big time.
For sure. And then even how probabilities are shown to us changes things. Research shows we react differently if it's 1 in 100,000 versus 0.001%.
Because that 1 in 100,000 makes you picture a person, while the percentage is just numbers.
Exactly. System 1, emotional, it grabs onto that single person. Percentage, not so much. Anyone good at communication, they know this.
Kind of scary how easily we're swayed just by the presentation. Are we doomed to be tricked by this stuff?
Not doomed, no. Being aware of it is the first step. We can start to see these biases in ourselves and in how others present info to us. That lets us use System 2 be more critical.
So not about getting rid of biases, but managing them, making them work for us.
Exactly. And this framing thing, it goes beyond just odds and chances. Even how much we'll pay for something is affected. Kahneman has this study. People had to put a dollar value on gambles, some with money outcomes, some emotional outcomes.
Like chance to win money versus chance to, I don't know, have some happy experience. What'd they find?
Turns out when the outcome was emotional, people weren't so sensitive to the probabilities anymore. It's like if we can vividly imagine it, the odds don't matter as much. The feeling, good or bad, takes over.
So picturing yourself winning that prize, feeling that joy, you might take a bigger risk, even if the odds are terrible. The feeling becomes more real than the actual chance.
Yeah, that's the idea. And it's not just emotions. Even adding details to money outcomes, even if the details are irrelevant, it can change things.
Okay, like how? Details changing how we see money.
Kahneman talks about this. Imagine you have a 21% chance to get $59 next Monday. Now imagine it's a 21% chance to get a big blue envelope with $59 in it next Monday morning.
I guess that blue envelope makes it more real, something to picture.
Yep.
The idea is that envelope makes it concrete, you can imagine it, and that somehow makes it seem worth more.
Wild how these tiny details have such a big impact on us. Give me a lot to think about. Any other biases in how we process info that we should be aware of?
One more. Denominator neglect.
Denominator neglect. Never heard of that one. What's that all about?
So it's like this. We tend to focus on the numerator, the number of times something happens, more than the denominator, the total number of possibilities. He's got this experiment, people picking marbles from urns. Red marbles win a prize.
So one urn, fewer marbles, but more of them are red. Other urns got more marbles overall, but less are red. Classic probability puzzle.
Right, and even though the urn with fewer marbles give you a better shot at winning, people went for the one with more red marbles, even though overall less chance of winning. They saw more potential winners without doing the math on the overall odds.
Tricked by the visual, the pile of red, without thinking it through. Denominator neglect. And this matters in real life, especially with how risks are communicated. Like saying 1,000 homicides a year are by mentally ill people sounds way worse than the chance of being killed by such a person is 0.00036% annually.
Whoa, same info, totally different impact. That first one plays right into our fears.
Exactly. It's all about framing, again. Highlighting the numerator, the scary number of homicides, but not giving you the denominator, the total population, it makes the risk seem huge.
Like with vaccine side effects, right? Saying how many kids might have a reaction, even if it's tiny compared to everyone vaccinated, it creates a lot of fear.
Perfect example. Got to be careful with how info is presented, especially when it comes to risk. These biases, like this denominator neglect, they can really mess with our judgment.
Okay, so prospect theory. It's powerful for understanding how we make choices when we don't know what'll happen. But any weaknesses? Does it always predict how people act?
Good question. It's been super influential, but yeah, there are criticisms. One thing is, it doesn't really factor in disappointment and regret.
So it covers how we think about gains and losses before we choose, but not how we feel after, especially if it goes bad.
Right. Like, imagine this. 90% chance to win $1 million, or take $50 for sure, versus 90% chance to win $1 million, or a guaranteed $150,000. If you gamble in that second scenario and lose, the regret would be way worse.
Because passing up on 150 grand would feel way worse than just 50 bucks. The missed opportunity, ouch.
Exactly. So there are other models like regret theory that try to include those feelings more, but a lot of times they don't make predictions that are that different from prospect theory.
So trade-off, more complex, but not necessarily better predictions.
Yeah. Kahneman has this analogy. Scientists like theories that are like a bag of tools. You won't switch to a heavier bag unless the new tools are clearly better. And so far, prospect theory, it's a pretty darn good tool.
Makes sense. We've covered a lot. Loss aversion, framing, that possibility effect, denominator neglect. Our brains are amazing, but they sure get tripped up easily. But before we wrap up, I want to see how this all comes together practically. Like, what about when we're deciding on risk policies, not just one-off choices?
Great transition. That takes us right into the final part of our dive. Let's see how understanding these biases can help us make better decisions about risk, both personally and, for bigger organizations.
All right, so we've seen how loss aversion, all that framing stuff, and how we see rare events, it all messes with our decisions. But now I'm thinking bigger picture. How does this apply to risk policies, not just like one choice at a time?
This is where it gets really useful. Remember that example? Samuelson's friend wouldn't take that coin toss bet, lose $100, win 200.
Yeah. Only if you could do it like 100 times.
Ah!
Seemed weird then, but makes more sense now.
It's all about narrow versus broad framing. Each bet on its own, loss aversion kicks in, we hate that potential loss. But zoom out, look at the whole set of bets, suddenly those games look good.
Like, got to see the whole forest, not just one tree, right? This applies to stuff beyond just gambling.
Oh, totally. Imagine a city like New York gets hit with, let's say, 200 dumb lawsuits every year, right? Each one has a small chance of costing them a lot, like $1 million. They could just settle each one for less, 100 grand, avoid that big risk.
Seems logical, right? Why risk the huge loss when you can just pay a smaller amount and know what you're getting?
That's narrow framing, and it can lead to bad decisions long term. If they broaden their view, looked at the total cost over, say, 5 years, it might actually be cheaper to fight those lawsuits, even if they lose some.
Hold on, really? Even if it means losing and paying out that million sometimes. How does that work?
Because those few losses would probably be balanced out by all the money they save by not settling every single case. Big picture thinking, not letting fear of each individual loss run the show.
Huh, that's interesting. Makes me think, do we do this narrow framing all the time without realizing it? So focused on not losing right now, we miss out on bigger gains later? How do we stop doing that?
Awareness is key, yeah. When there's a risky decision, take a step back. Am I just trying to avoid this one loss, or am I thinking about the total effect of my choices?
Like, am I using a microscope or a telescope to look at this? Love that. Anything else we can do to get better with risk?
Having a risk policy helps. Basically, you decide beforehand how much risk you're okay with, then set rules for how you'll handle different decisions. So you're not just winging it based on fear or wanting a quick win.
So, like, have guidelines, not just go with the gut feeling in the moment.
Right. More deliberate, strategic with risk, not just reacting all the time.
This has been awesome. Seriously eye-opening. I feel like I've got a whole new way of thinking about how my mind works and how to make better choices, especially with all this risk and uncertainty stuff. For you, what are some of the big takeaways from thinking fast and slow?
Big one for me is our intuition. It's great, but it can totally mislead us. We've got all these biases. They're like warping how we see things, affecting our choices, and we often don't even know it's happening.
A little bit humbling, right? We think we're so rational, but really, emotions and biases are in control a lot of the time.
Exactly. That's why understanding this stuff is powerful, makes us aware of our own blind spots so we can be more rational, make better decisions. Got to use both parts of our minds, the intuition, A&D, the analytical thinking.
Well put. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into behavioral economics. Learned a ton, and I'm ready to put it all into practice.
Glad to do it. And remember, understanding our own minds, it's a journey, right? Keep learning, keep asking questions. There's always more to discover.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Hope you found this as fascinating as we did. Until next time, keep those minds sharp.